Tonight we saw Ohtani leave the World Series with an apparent arm injury after sliding into second base. Here's what we know so far. Ken Rosenthal of Fox Sports said that Ohtani is in fact dealing with a left shoulder injury, and NHK Broadcasting also said that he actually popped his shoulder out of socket. Some other social media accounts actually translated the conversation that was mic'd up between Ohtani and the trainer, where basically he said it was the left shoulder and he thought that it actually popped out as well. When we talk about a shoulder joint popping out, there are essentially two things that can happen: a full-blown dislocation and something else known as a subluxation, where the head of the humerus is actually going to come out and then go back right in. So with today's video, we are first going to take a look at the injury replay and try to determine why this specific injury would have happened on this exact play. Then I'll go over the relevant anatomy of the shoulder joint, and finally I'll talk about the injury types and what Ohtani or somebody that has suffered this sort of injury should expect moving forward. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my channel. If you're not familiar with me, my name is Nick Gallo and I'm a doctor of physical therapy, and with my channel I take a look at sports injuries and I explain them so that they are a little bit easier to understand. I'll talk about the relevant anatomy for that specific injury as well as what that person should expect during the rehab process. If you enjoy this sort of content and you want to see more of it, please hit that thumbs up and subscribe to this channel, because I will be making more of these videos in the future regarding sports injuries, rehabilitation, and other physical therapy related content. Also, if you yourself have suffered a shoulder dislocation or a subluxation, go ahead and comment in the comment section below. So we see here on the slide that as Ohtani is going to go down, what he's going to do is actually going to put his hand out to try to brace the fall. And as he's doing this, we see that arm essentially trailing behind him. So here I have a model of the shoulder, and so for this particular injury, we're going to focus on a joint in the shoulder known as the glenohumeral joint. So we have two bones that make up this joint. The first bone, which is the upper arm bone, is known as the humerus. And so that bone is going to come up and we're going to form that ball of this ball and socket joint in the shoulder. This is going to be the head of the humerus. Then as we go over to the scapula, also called the shoulder blade, there is an area on the end here which is essentially concave going inwards, and this is going to be the glenoid. And so we have the humerus and the glenoid together that of course are going to make up this GH joint. The GH joint is going to be stabilized by these ligaments that we see on the model here, and there also is a very important structure that's made up of 4 different muscles. This is known as the rotator cuff. So the rotator cuff is actually not visualized on the model here, but like I said, it's made up of 4 main muscles, and their tendons are also going to contribute to overall stability in that shoulder joint. So let's talk about the 2 types of injuries that can occur in this specific case. The first one is going to be that full-blown shoulder dislocation, and it is just like it sounds. Basically, what's going to happen is the head of the humerus is going to fully come out of that glenoid, and it's going to stay there, and it needs to be put back in place by a medical professional. There are a couple different types of shoulder dislocations, but the most common type of dislocation is an anterior dislocation, where the head of the humerus is actually going to come out to the front and sometimes a little bit inferior as well. So that is the most common type of dislocation. There's another type of dislocation where the head of the humerus is actually going to go to the posterior or to the back, but most often what we do see when we talk about a shoulder dislocation is it's going to be one of those anterior ones. There are a few different causes for an anterior dislocation. The first one and most common is going to be falling on an outstretched arm. The second one is going to be any sort of really heavy movements involving the shoulder. And finally, a lot of times what we see is somebody that's put a lot of repetitive stress or trauma going through the arm, whether they be a previous swimmer or overhead athlete, just slowly damaging it over time, and that could also lead to a dislocation. As we look on the injury replay, once again, it looks like that this injury is consistent with falling on the outstretched arm, because as Ohtani is going down to slide into second base, he's going to stretch out that left arm, his entire body weight is going to go through it, and we see that arm trailing as he makes contact with the bag. One other position that his shoulder is commonly dislocated in is a position known as abduction and external rotation. So abduction is going to be the position of the shoulder where it's going out to the side. External rotation is going like this. And if a person falls on their shoulder in that sort of position, this greatly stresses the anterior portion of the shoulder. We didn't see that in this case. However, it's important to say that also this is a common position that we see for these shoulder dislocations. Now let's go ahead and talk about what a shoulder subluxation is. So in this case, what's going to happen is the head of the humerus is going to come out, but it's also going to come come right back in. So it's not going to stay out, and a lot of times it doesn't need to be put back in by a medical professional. And obviously this is going to be the better of the two scenarios. As Ohtani is walking off the field, we see that the trainer actually has his arm in more of an internally rotated sling position that we would put somebody in after suffering a shoulder dislocation or a subluxation. And it's really hard to tell based on this whether or not the shoulder is completely out or not. Maybe you could see that it looks like the left shoulder is slightly forward compared to the right, but honestly at this stage it's really just too early to tell. After an injury like this, what's going to happen is the person is going to have imaging, so it's possible that he's going to have an x-ray, and the x-ray is going to show whether the shoulder is in proper alignment or not. And then after that, he is of course going to have some MRI or advanced imaging done to kind of look at those soft tissue structures located in the shoulder, because it is surrounded by the ligaments, the rotator cuff, and then there's also a section of the shoulder that's extremely important known as the glenohumeral labrum. And so anytime somebody has suffered a subluxation or a dislocation, they are at risk for damage to any one of these structures or even several. I know the main question on everybody's mind is whether or not they think that he could play in the rest of the World Series. Honestly, once again, right now, it's way too early to tell this, but the one thing that's going to dictate whether he has a shot or not is going to be obviously whether or not the shoulder has fully come out of that glenohumeral joint. So if I happen to hear any updates regarding Ohtani's case, I'll be sure to update everybody in the comment section. Also, if you happen to hear anything, please feel free to update us as well. For the time being though, Ohtani of course is going to be following that rule that we often follow for acute injuries, for where he's going to get a lot of rest. We're going to ice the injury. He's going to get some compression, and he's also going to have to elevate the affected extremity, because as of right now, we want to get as much swelling and inflammation out of the joint to allow for adequate healing. And then once things start to progress and we know the specific injury, we can work on range of motion. The big thing that we want to avoid after any sort of anterior dislocation or subluxation is obviously going to be that abduction external rotation position, because of how much stress that's going to place on the anterior capsule. So he's going to be in some sort of immobilization thing, whether it be a brace or something along those lines. And then from there, we can move forward as more details start to come out. Knowing the specific injury in this case, of course, is greatly going to dictate the amount of time he's going to spend in rehab and how rehab is going to progress. Whether or not the rotator cuff and or the labrum is injured in this sort of specific injury can also greatly dictate how long he's going to be out, because sometimes it's going to require surgical intervention. So we wish Ohtani the best of luck moving forward. We hope it's along the lines of a shoulder subluxation at most, with no rotator cuff or labrum involvement. If that does happen to get involved in this injury, then it may result in some sort of surgical intervention. Once again, if I hear any updates regarding that, I'll be sure to update everybody. Thank you so much for watching my video today. If you enjoyed this sort of content, I'm going to go ahead and link one of my playlists so that you can watch some of the videos that I've talked about in the past. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.